Welcome to Monsters and Multiclass, your Dungeons and Dragons fix. I'm Elioti,
I'm Jared Bornagle.
And I'm Will Melder.
and on this episode, we are taking a look at Exhaustion. And no, not the existential kind that permeates all modern life. The fun, gamey time. The one where you're like, oh, you get exhausted and you can't walk as fast. And then there's these crazy things called good night rests, which can get rid of it.
Yeah, still looking
fine.
for that fantasy.
Yeah. So we're trying out kind of a thing with the show where we're branching out a bit, covering just more different topics instead of like, oh, monsters and multi-class or like subclasses. It's their name.
He's got a little shirt.
Yeah. So our goal with this episode is to kind of dissect how exhaustion works in 5e. So we'll do a quick cover of how it works. It's not too complicated. Just to make sure we're all on the same page with the conversation. And then what we don't like about it, what we do like about it, and what changes we think we can make. So we'll see how it goes. This might be a shorter episode, but so be it. Apparently that's a good thing. People like shorter episodes. Who knew?
We said we wouldn't let that get to us.
Right?
We said.
So Exhaustion in 5th edition, it is a condition. There's a bunch of different things that could cause it. Some of the pre-written stuff, like if you miss a long rest, if you don't sleep enough, doing things like forced marches could cause exhaustion.
So actually, sorry, just to correct you a little bit there. There's no specific rule that says if you miss a long rest, you gain a level of exhaustion.
If you don't sleep. I guess.
Right. Yeah, sorry. That's
okay. Yeah, if you stay up.
Right. You start rolling Constitution saving throws, but you don't just it's not like an immediate thing.
Right.
It's all, I think, covered under Forced March, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah, well, specifically Forced Marches, if you are walking more than 8 hours, for every hour past the 8-hour mark, you roll a Constitution save of DC of 10 plus however many hours past HUR. And for every time you fail it, you get a level of exhaustion. There's rules in the Dungeon Master Guide about extreme heat and extreme cold and made into do con saves. There's spell effects. There's a whole bunch of different things.
One spell effect.
There's just one spell effect that causes
Correct.
exhaustion?
There's only one spell effect, and that is, I Googled this earlier, Sickening Radiance. Sorry, that is yes, there is only one spell that causes exhaustion, and that is Sickening Radiance. It's definitely not a common one. That's a 4th level spell. It's, if they fail a con saving throw, they take 40-10 damage and suffer 1 level of exhaustion. But that's it. And that's on the Sorcerer, Warlock, and Wizard spell list.
Okay. I thought there was more for some reason. Maybe I'm thinking that there's definitely monster abilities.
Yes.
That could cause it. So there's a bunch of official things that could cause it, and then DMs are very freely use it where it's just an idea to apply where it's like, all right, we need a penalty for something that's happening that isn't damage. Exhaustion is a very common one because it sticks around until taken care of. To remove it, a solid long rest with sleep, food, and water will lower it by 1 level. And then there's various spells that could reduce it or get rid of it altogether. There's 6 levels of exhaustion. So when you first get it, you start at level 1, and then every time you get it again, you go up a level, and they each have different effects. And the effects are cumulative. So if you're at level 3, you have the effects of level 3 exhaustion, level 2, and level 1. At level 1, you have disadvantage on all ability checks. At level 2, your speed is halved. At level 3, disadvantage on attacks, rolls, and saving throws. At level 4, your hit point max is halved. At 5, your speed is reduced to 0. And at 6, you just die.
As it happens when I stay up for 6 hours past my bedtime.
And hey, there we go. Segue into one of the problems. That is really about all it works. There's not much more to it in 5th edition.
Yeah, in terms of issues, I think there's a couple of things. That's one that is obviously there, the fact that it's almost a little too easy to gain exhaustion when you start talking about forced marches or so.
Right.
The ability to fight through it isn't terribly difficult. On like a forced march, the general rules for that is that for every hour that you continue on past the 8 hours of marching, of adventuring, we'll say, then you have a DC of 10 plus the hour past 8. So if you've been marching for 9 hours, you have a DC 11 Constitution saving throw. If you succeed, you get no exhaustion. If you fail, you gain a level of exhaustion. And then, say, DC goes up each time more and more and more. So
Right.
there is the possibility that you fail 6 of those in a row and die from a 6-hour forced march. I don't feel like that's super realistic. It's also not very, like, statistically speaking, probably not going to happen.
Yeah, it does just feel kind of odd when, like, if you think about it as one level, like, all right, we're doing a first march, roll it. Some people get exhausted, others don't. And if it's just this kind of binary thing where it happens or it doesn't, and they get disadvantage on ability checks, it feels okay. When it starts to be like, all right, we need to push on an extra 4 hours to get where we're going through the night, and you have to roll 4 Constitution saving throws every hour. And like, as someone at the end of it could have their speed half, their hit point maximum half, and disadvantage on literally everything.
Yeah.
And then it takes 4 nights of rest to get rid of it.
Yeah, it's a little extreme.
Yeah, it starts to feel like too much. It doesn't quite line up.
Especially because in my youth, in my heyday, I would stay up pretty late. Maybe not the same thing as an actual adventuring day and marching across the terrain and whatnot. But yeah, the next day you feel kind of tired, but you can sleep it off. You know, you're a bit
Right.
sore, you're whatever. But these are full-fledged adventurers, people who are supposed to be able to slay dragons, and you're telling me that going 4 hours past their bedtime in is just so much that, as you said, they need 4 days to fully recover.
Right. Yeah, or just the concept of an all-nighter,
Yeah.
so to speak. It's like, I mean, I have done all-nighters. I'm not an adventurer. I'm not like a hardy, high constitution person, but I could do an all-nighter and like be okay.
Yeah. If I'm being
And
honest, I
according
give
to that,
myself like
that's
a
8 that I would have had to make. No, beyond that, because then every hour the following day you have to as well.
yes.
So we're at like 24 of these rolls. You die by lunchtime.
Right. When
It's like,
realistically, I feel like if I stay up all night, and we'll say like very actively, I feel like I'm more closer to maybe 1, maybe 2 levels of exhaustion. Where like the point where, let's say I can't do any work that day because I can't focus. Okay, that sounds like disadvantage on all ability checks. Fair
sure.
enough. Speed is halved. Also seems like kind of that line of, okay, I stayed up all night, and if you asked me to run, I'm probably going to be pretty slow here. But beyond that, I mean, it just seems hit point max reduced. Like if somebody tried stabbing me, adrenaline works. Like,
Right.
And I think that actually gets to the point of where the biggest problem, in my opinion, is with this. There's like a single axis of exhaustion where there needs to be
yes,
multiple tiers. The first two, like you said, it's stuff we have all been through. It's like, I spent the last 26 hours drinking. I'm worse at things than usual. Versus
Right.
somebody, tied me to the back of a horse and made me march for 40 miles. That's advanced exhaustion. And that's
yeah,
the stuff that will start absolutely killing you, that very few of us will luckily ever have to experience. But in an
Right.
adventuring party, it does come up.
Glad you say that, Will, because in the spirit of being thorough in our discussions, I volunteered you to go on a forced march behind a horse for 40 miles this
Really?
very evening, and we're going to live stream the entire thing.
Ooh, I think it's supposed to be cold tonight.
Oh, extreme temperatures. We can test that too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, down in the 30s Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
So no warm clothes, t-shirt and shorts.
And so I don't want to segue too much because I like where we're going with this, but another just major issue that I see with exhaustion is the fact that everything that is affected beyond the first tier has to do with combat. When realistically, you're gaining exhaustion out of combat, and it's affecting things out of combat as well, except for, there's just this kind of weird disconnect where it all seems to circle back to the idea that combat is the most important thing in D&D, and all of these things that affect you with exhaustion are combat related, except for the very first level, which is disadvantage on all ability checks. So probably have more thoughts around that, but I think those are kind of my two big issues. One, it's unrealistic in general how exhaustion plays out, but two, the fact that it's all combat focused and overly punishing out of combat.
Yeah, just starting with the disadvantage on all ability checks just right off the bat.
Yeah, that's
Which
like the very first thing.
Yeah.
Disadvantage is like it's very debilitating. It really is. And if
it makes you want to not roll.
Yes.
Like you try and avoid rolling.
To give an example, and this is totally trying to highlight the issues with exhaustion, not of the scenario that you set up, Ellie, but we were, as a party, we were trying to crack a cipher. And while trying to crack that cipher, we were going into the wee hours of the night, and we set it up, or you set it up, that it was a forced march rules, which perfectly fine. It made tons of sense.
Yeah, there needed to be some give and take about giving up at some point.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So the idea was for every hour we pushed through, we'd have to make these Constitution saving throws. Well, a couple people failed pretty early on, and they just became entirely useless. Because the very first level of exhaustion was disadvantage on ability checks. And that was how we were basically trying to get this information, or at least clues about the cipher. It was like a physical puzzle, which was, well, everybody loved it. Not me. I said at the start I hate puzzles, but but it was really well set up. Like I cannot. It was geniusly crafted.
Thank you.
Just hate puzzles. That's on me. But the way that we were supposed to get these clues was through making intelligence checks. I was playing a high intelligence character. I succeeded on the first one, but by the second hour, I had failed. And now my +5 intelligence started to feel entirely useless compared to our +0 paladin, because they had no disadvantage. They were surviving or making these Constitution saving throws. So the fact that this exhaustion is something I'm gaining that is out of combat and is, again, so debilitating right out the gate at first level that I become useless as 20 intelligence. I mean, that is extremely high intelligence. Right. And now I feel like I can't contribute to the same extent. It might have actually been 18 intelligence, but that almost makes the point even more.
Right.
The 18 intelligence shouldn't be totally thrown out after one failed roll, basically,
right,
for these types of challenges.
Yeah, the math of advantage disadvantage works out to be an equivalent to a ±5, so it does completely negate it all.
Right.
Proficiency bonus could stop that a bit, but a lot of times that doesn't come up.
Yeah. And so when you think more on the fact that that is the first level of exhaustion, is it doesn't sit right with me. Because the rest of these things are very heavily combat focused and showing how your combat abilities slow down. But this first level of exhaustion otherwise just makes you kind of useless outside of combat. And we talked about that a lot with the Berserker Barbarian. They have their Frenzy Rage ability that gives them exhaustion. The reason why it sucks so much is because Barbarians are already not the best at out of combat things. They don't have the most skills. They have some of the least amount of skills, and those skills are very focused on the physical prowess. Well, if the very first level they get exhaustion on absolutely everything, then maybe the barbarian who took a history check is now useless with their history ability. And that was the one thing that they could say, oh, I can do this out of combat. You know, at least I'm good at persuasion checks or something. It's like, well, nope, sorry, you've got one level of exhaustion. You now are only going to be useful in combat.
Right. And going back to that setup that you were talking about, trying to figure out that code, that does bring up the other issue that Will hinted at, are the different types of exhaustion being needed. And there's nothing for mental exhaustion. And that's, which is a huge thing, mental fatigue. And what we were doing would have been perfect for that. Because you're right, if you stay up all night to try and crack this, you're not at risk of just dying.
Right.
Where according to this, like, we were starting to get up there.
Right.
Which
I think
is
a couple people
insane.
got to like 2 or 3 levels of exhaustion.
Right.
But what I will push back and say is that this is a great example of somewhere where you can actually make one of the things worse by making it more realistic. Because the disadvantage advantage Hammer has turned everything into a nail for the
Yes.
designers of D&D, unfortunately. Where this would be a great time for a big fat table. Just a monster honking table with rows and columns, just the most obnoxious, annoying details that nobody wanted. Just massive, like multi-page, like spread table of how you slowly lose your ability to solve puzzles when you stay up all night doing puzzles.
I think
Because
that
there is
it's
a moment where it becomes a negative 20 on your intelligence checks.
sure.
You're just never solving that puzzle, but you're not going to be like half as fast.
Right. And that's
Right.
something I guess we've recently been playing Mothership, and they have a table. It's specifically around wounds. When you take a wound, depending on the type of damage you took, you are affected in a certain way. You took bludgeoning damage, okay, well maybe your legs are going to be broken. If you took burn damage, you might be set on fire. Like kind of just those logical conclusions, right? Exhaustion throws that all out the window. And it says you're exhausted. That means you're exhausted in this one way. And yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it, Will, is that everything is a nail. Now, I don't think we need big honking tables, but maybe different types of exhaustion for different things is an avenue that could be explored. Maybe like 2 or 3 types of exhaustion, maybe.
See, I think that's the problem is that I did that as a joke. Nobody wants these
I
huge
know.
tables, and D&D really went out of its way to kind of get rid of them. And
Right.
there's not this willingness to go back. So when you end up with multiple types of exhaustion, it's definitely heading towards the road of there's too many damn tables in this game. So
That's I guess
it's tough.
Yeah. As long as it's done, and I think we're seeing that just, and this is more turning into like a 5th edition design philosophy, but things definitely started off with let's strip things down to the basics, which I think was really off-putting for a lot of people who were used to 3.5 and such that had so many knobs and dials that were able to be turned. But it felt like 5th edition was very much trying to figure out the bare bones of what could make this system work. And since then, they have been adding little layers to it as time has gone on to see what works, what can we change and move that isn't going to break the game. And overall, they've done a really good job of figuring those things out. So where I think, yes, you're right, the overall design philosophy has been let's avoid these big tables, let's avoid the complication. I do think that we're seeing an acceptance of complication when there's a legitimate issue in how things are presented now. Optional features is, I think, a good example. That was not heard of at the start because that's too complicated. But people have gotten pretty comfortable with the game and have thought, yeah, we could deal with an optional feature. Most recently, we've got feats with tiers to them and level requirements or prerequisites. That's another sign that things are kind of moving in that direction where complicated's okay if it's done with care.
Yeah, and added, kind of an additional books and stuff like that after the fact. I understand why to keep like the player handbook, the core 3 Dungeon Master player handbook, and Monster Manual kind of like clean and simple. But I could absolutely see, they need to do like a Dungeon Master 2.
Yeah, and I think I want to say
Dungeon Master
4th
Guide,
edition.
too.
Yeah, I know what you meant. Yeah, DMG 2.0. I'm pretty sure that's happened in the past. They've released books that are specifically catered toward Dungeon Masters. We're never going to see it again from a financial standpoint, though.
Yeah, you're probably right. But I could absolutely see in there in varying areas having expanded exhaustion and like the different types and stuff like that. And I do know it's just like one of many conditions, and it could seem like we're like asking a lot to expand one condition. But when it comes to telling stories of heroes and heroics and adventuring, the exhaustion aspect is a big part of it. It's common in all sorts of media and stories about the heroes suffering from these effects of being exhausted from these like crazy long days and hardships they're going through, but still managing to push through despite that. And I think it really has a cool place in D&D. But the current one size fits all, really harsh from the start table, no like means to push through it, hard to get rid of unless you have the right spells. It just doesn't do it.
I think what you're getting at, I totally agree with. It's the fact that it makes DMs not want to use it, when in reality, it is an amazing storytelling tool.
Right.
Because when I look at giving the party exhaustion, all I could think is they have no way of getting rid of this until I give them a long rest, which a lot of times I don't want to do because that is a way of exhausting you, is by not giving you long rests.
Right.
And if I add one level, it's already kind of set a tone where, hey, you're going to suck at everything else the rest of the day. And if we just keep adding more of those, it doesn't add to the fun, as I've noted or noticed.
So is there anything you guys like about it?
I think what you
We
just
did
said.
promise
Yeah, no, I think
like
what you just
dislike.
said is
Yeah.
is what's liked about it. I mean, I guess the current table, what I like about it is it's simple. That is at least some benefit. It's not
Right.
overly complicated. I've looked at a lot of fixes for exhaustion in the last couple of days. Most of them I would categorize as overly complicated in a way that is remembering more dice rolls, it's remembering more modifiers, and it's hard to get something that is elegant and just gets the point across. So where the table itself, it's not too great. Um, yeah, that is fine. The simplicity of it is fine.
So we want to talk about fixes then?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And I guess a disclaimer I want to put on this, because since we're kind of like, this is a somewhat different concept. I don't know if we're going to hit different groups of people or something who aren't as familiar with the show. When we talk about fixes, we're not the people who, here's our fix, here's like the rules written, play tested thing. We like to talk about it as an open ended conversation to inspire people to add it to the game. That's kind of what we talk about. I just
Yeah.
felt like I felt like expectations need to be set.
Yes, because realistically, everybody has some home rules at their table, and
Right.
something that we say, maybe you like 90% of it, and you think, I'm going to change it up 10%. That's fine. Or you don't want to use any of it, and you just like talking about the numbers and the theory crafting of it like we do. That's fine too. Realistically, I want to change up exhaustion or use exhaustion more in our next little mini campaign, and it's going to be like 2 months, so it's the perfect testing ground for this type of idea. And I
Right.
was yelling about it in our chat, and Ellie's like, let's record this
Right.
because that makes more sense. So so yeah, you're not going to get some hard rules on it, but hopefully it inspires you. So I think that one that I mentioned is a fix that I've seen a lot is this idea of negative dice rolls as a modifier. I don't actually love that as a fix, but it was one that I saw tossed around a lot. It was this idea of, for each level of exhaustion that you gain, you had a die value up of a negative modifier to everything you did. So like at first level, it was minus 1d4. At second level, it was minus 1d6, then 1d8, 1d10, 1d12, death. And that definitely was interesting in that it showed a good exponential growth of the exhaustion, but felt like it was still overly punishing, even at low levels.
Right. And that was on everything, right? Ability checks,
Correct.
attack rolls, saving throws.
Yes, and this specific one I
That's
found was like even death saving throws, and that I did not like.
yeah. Yeah, to me that sounds incredibly harsh to start, and then it still has the same issue about the escalation of it, where if you stay up for 6 hours, you could potentially die.
Right. Right. So I think one of the first things I'm gravitating towards is more levels. Why is it 6? Why does it need to be capped at 6?
Don't know. I don't think it needs to be.
We could have a lot of steps in between. I mean, there's so many ways that we can tweak this and add things. But if you say that death is actually, I don't know, just throw a number out there, 12 levels of exhaustion, then that gives you a lot more room to give exhaustion and not feel like you are on the edge of death. You can give multiple levels of exhaustion potentially as a hindrance, to say that, hey, this ability, if you fail your saving throw for it, you gain 2 levels of exhaustion.
Yeah, I definitely think adding more levels is a good way to fix some of it. Because you could also start it off a lot easier, where 1 or 2 levels of exhaustion is not as immediately debilitating.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're not getting to the point where you're going to die after 6 hours. but you could be getting to the point where you have to die after 12 hours, which is also equally silly. So I think the forced march stuff needs to go.
Okay. Yeah, in its current
It's
state.
Yeah, I would almost
But-
more do it like per instance of forced marched.
So with forced march, that is specifically around traveling.
Yeah.
So again, that's being forced to walk, and you do get the Constitution saving throws. I guess I feel like if there were, 12 layers to it, you're talking about potentially not dying until somebody fails 12 times that Constitution save. I guess the hours go up, so it is possible to happen at some point, but that's an interesting one. I guess I'd be curious to see how that happens. At
It
minimum,
also kind
though,
of exacerbates the whole getting out of the situation.
with how many
What do
you
you mean by
remove.
Yeah, you march for 12 hours, you get 4 levels or whatever because you had a bad night.
Sure.
Sleep 1, march for 12 hours.
Right.
No, that's a fair point. That probably will need to be discussed as well. If this is what we want to keep talking about, there's no hard and fast rule just because it's the first thing I brought up. But getting rid of only one per night doesn't really seem fitting either.
Yeah, and as soon as you hit the 11th level of exhaustion, you're like, all right, guys, this time for real, week off. Come on.
And even that wouldn't get you out of it.
Yeah, you're still tired.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that aspect of it I don't like either. I guess we kind of skipped over it where like the default way to reduce exhaustion is when you take a long rest with food and water and like you could reduce a level.
Right.
And it's just one. And that is very tough.
Yeah, I wonder where do we want to start this conversation? There's so many pieces of exhaustion that can be
Right.
changed.
Right.
But let's start with that. The idea that yes, you can only remove one at a time. That could be something as simple as you're guaranteed to reduce by 1, but maybe there's a way that you can roll a die and reduce that many levels of exhaustion. Hit dice is an example. Maybe you can
I
expend
saw
a
that
hit
used
die.
somewhere, yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I was just in looking this up. I saw somebody
fine,
suggested
yeah.
somewhere. Might have just been like a Reddit post, but
Sure. Like maybe, you can expend a hit die and I don't know, just that's it. That reduces a level of exhaustion.
yeah, I do like that idea. On a long rest though,
Yes, on
not
a
a
long
short
rest.
rest. Yeah.
And so I think what would be interesting about that is, generally with long rests, you get half your hit dice back. This would need to happen after that occurs. Because the idea to me would be that you're sacrificing your ability to get yourself back together by kind of reducing that exhaustion now.
Right.
So like tomorrow your hit points don't recover as quickly.
Right. Or on the flip side, if you held on to enough reserves, hit dice, before it recovers and you have enough to do it, that could be as well. I could see kind of either way.
Yeah, that makes sense. If you've got, let's say, 4 levels of exhaustion and then you go to bed, you can expend 4 hit dice and then the next day you recover
Great,
4
yeah.
hit dice or whatever amount.
Right.
It depends on what level you are. And that would basically mean that you could have up to 4 levels or whatever levels of exhaustion. Half your level in exhaustion you could recover if you didn't use any other hit dice.
Right.
That could be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm 50-50 on if you do it before or after recovering them.
I guess before does make sense because then if you are down them for the day, if it's been a very grueling day, you've had multiple short rests, you've expended all of your hit dice, and you've got 2 levels of exhaustion, then in that case, going to bed might not reduce a level of exhaustion. You might
Right.
feel like crap tomorrow, but you get your hit dice back, and then the
Right.
next day, yes, you can reduce all of that exhaustion in a day. It basically
Right.
makes it so that at worst you've got a single day of recovery unless you're up in like the very high levels of exhaustion.
Yeah. Yeah, I think something like that could work.
So I think I'm with you. Rolling before would make more sense, or using them before.
Right.
And then would you still keep it where just a long rest reduces one level of exhaustion, or would you
Yeah,
have to
I
use a
think
hit
that's
die?
important to give it for free because that's kind of like that's D&D. It's based around that, like things reset
Yeah,
after a long day. This is like the one odd thing that carries through, make it extra scary. And again, good for story and narrative as we talked about. But there still needs to be just a free benefit. Take a long rest, lower one
sure.
at least.
Sure. And then any in addition that you want to reduce, you would need to expend hit dice.
Yeah,
Okay. I'm
this is
actually really
definitely
happy with that.
yeah. It's definitely game dependent. The type of games that we play where it's like these long stretched out narratives where it's just kind of day after day, different things are happening, different events, moving around, going to towns, having encounters, that sort of stuff. Something like that's really needed. The one exhaustion per day, I don't think per long rest works. I guess in a more kind of old school style of playing, and I don't know if old school is the right term, but like the more you're adventurers, you get an adventure, you go out, you delve the dungeon, you come back, you take 2 months off and have your downtime activities. That sort of stuff, the exhaustion as is could kind of work better because that is building to a nice narrative where like, yeah, you are really hurting by the end of it. But then you
Sure.
get to come home and take 2 months off and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, it's hard to, I guess, account for that because
Right.
in that case, I guess the rapidness of exhaustion can be viewed as a good thing. I still would then argue about the levels and what exactly they give aren't particularly
Yes.
accurate, but
Yeah. So yeah, I guess tackle that one head on. I definitely think disadvantage on all ability checks needs to not be the first level of exhaustion. I
correct.
don't know what it should be because any of these are really harsh for just one level. For
Right.
staying up, for walking in the woods 1 hour past your bedtime.
So yeah, that is I think the hardest question that I've been grappling with for the last 2 days. The idea that at first level you're generally gaining exhaustion again out of combat. I don't like the fact that its effects, for the most part, 5 out of 6, well, 4 out of 5 of them, death is kind of regardless of what pillar of D&D you're in.
Right.
4 out of 5 of them directly affect combat above all. But where do you gain exhaustion? Out of combat. Besides 2 abilities, I looked it up. There aren't any monsters that give exhaustion.
Seriously?
Yes, there's one
Maybe.
very specific boss in,
Okay.
I guess, Tomb of Annihilation or something. I might be wrong, but
Yeah.
it's not a common thing by any
I could
means.
sort of like ghosts and stuff like that, but I guess they all sapped like strength and constitution. They
And
don't
max
give
health
exhaustion.
and everything else.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I was
Yeah,
getting that stuff mixed up.
so the only time we're getting exhaustion levels in combat is if you're a frenzying barbarian and your rage ends. Okay. Or if you, I guess that's it. Oh, the spell. Sorry, Sickening Radiance.
Right.
So, like, it's why is it so focused on combat when this is really a out of combat thing? Like
Right.
it's from out of combat. It should affect things out of combat, and maybe not the entire thing. I get it to some extent. If you're super tired, if you're exhausted, yes, you're moving slower. You're doing whatever.
Right. But it does need to be to a really extreme level. I don't remember who said it. One of you said like adrenaline is a thing
Yes,
that works. It's like if you're like if you pulled an all nighter and then get into a fight with a bear, the fact that you pulled it all nighter is not going to be the thing that's holding you back here. Like your adrenaline's kicking up. Like it will be ignored for however long that takes.
right. For the 30 seconds, you know
Right.
that happens. And if you wanted to get extra complicated and realistic, which generally you don't in D&D, you could say that, oh, you're fighting while tired, and yes, you use adrenaline, and adrenaline reduces your exhaustion by 1d4, but then afterwards you gain that level in exhaustion. Whatever. I don't want to go that far, but
Right.
I do feel like some of these things should be reduced a little bit in
Right.
terms of combat debilitation.
I do want to kind of push back a little on that because I am not a combat vet and I don't know a whole lot about this stuff, but the reality is like your adrenaline is directly affected by your exhaustion. The adrenaline can overcome that, but you get back to kind of a steadier state. If you're not exhausted, the adrenaline still comes on. So there is like a hit to it. This is
Okay.
a huge problem in war is your soldiers didn't get a good night's sleep.
That's
And
fair.
it doesn't mean they're like useless and they don't die from this. They just are
Right.
like that second slower, and that second slower is a huge deal in combat.
Okay,
Which is
that's fair.
I guess where I come back to this idea of I want two different tables. I really do. I want like an in combat table and I want an out of combat table. And the in combat table starts off with, and I'm spitballing here, shoot stuff down, but at first level you maybe, I don't know, I want to say lose your reaction. That just sounds so strong. But
it's not. It's so oddly dependent on who's losing their reaction. It's so unfair.
Yeah.
I think is the best way to put it.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
But even just reducing speed to start, and it can be minus 10 speed. It doesn't have to be half your speed.
Ooh,
This is
penalty on initiative.
Penalty on
that's
initiative.
It's
thematic.
Makes sense. It's not completely debilitating, but it does kind of suck. Brandon.
And this is where we have to crack something open, and that's the big advantage disadvantage hullabaloo.
We got to decide.
We need the
answer
table.
the advantage disadvantage.
You need a
question.
table for this. -1, -2,
Wait.
-4, -8. Yeah.
The only thing that I could get behind in terms of a growing, I want to say a growing disadvantage, but I'm trying not to use that word. That dirty word is basically a reverse proficiency bonus, starting off at -1, then -2, then -3, -4, to basically. It's hard because it's like to all your rolls. I don't know. That seems kind of strong. Just things you're proficient in. That doesn't really make any sense. So that's the only thing I could get behind, but I still find it a little bit complicated. And I'm sorry if that sounds rambly. As I said, I've been thinking about this a lot and have already thrown out ideas in my head before this. So if that's like, you half explained that, just tell me.
So I do think like as like a first level early on, a flat, not like a 1d4 because like a -4 to rolls is terrible, but just a flat -1 to any d20 roll could be okay. Like it sucks, but it's not debilitating, and it covers all aspects of combat and out of combat. And effectively, because you have this level of exhaustion, you are 5% worse that day. That's all that's saying.
Right.
That to me actually feels okay. That doesn't feel too bad.
My only issue with it is it's something that you have to remember for all rolls, and that's
Sure, but I mean,
like,
you already have stuff like that. Like you have abilities and stuff that give you resistance to things or advantage on certain saves, but not others, and expertise. And it's like we do need to trust people to remember things.
This is why this is such a big deal, and people
Yeah.
don't realize it. Is you bring someone new to the table, even with as streamlined as D&D 5e is, there's 1,000 things that they are not going to get out of the gate. Advantage and disadvantage is not one of them, and everybody loves it for that. It's like roll 2
That's
dice,
true.
take the high one. All my problems are solved, but they're not. We need the table back.
it's a little bit tough, and I guess from the perspective that we have, which is a little bit more on the advanced side, I don't think it would be terrible. So for like, if we're talking about house rules, and I get the feeling that most people who just started playing aren't watching our show, but if you did, okay, maybe you want to mess with exhaustion. But
Right.
for like us, I think yes, adding a flat -1 roll to everything would be a good way to do it. Now, would that continue? Would it be 2 levels of exhaustion? You have -2, 3, you've got -3. Or are you thinking that's just like level 1 of exhaustion, -1 to all rolls?
I would scale it like a Fibonacci sequence, like 1, 2, 4,
Like a what?
8, 16. It's doubling.
Double it.
Okay. At each level. So 1 level exhaustion, -2, or is 1, then level 2 is
2,
-2, level
4,
3 is
8,
-4.
16, 32,
Uh-huh.
64.
I think you die. You just die.
Yeah.
But
So if we're
doing it,
also
sorry, just the real quick thing
Yeah.
of if we keep 6 levels of exhaustion, well, proficiency bonus can get up to 6, and -5, I guess, would be where you cap out before you die. And that I think works really well, actually, because of the fact that it's saying if you are a higher level adventurer, you're still not getting negatives. It's like you can push through it, but you're not as great as you normally are.
right. So if we are expanding the levels of exhaustion, like if we still want it to ultimately end in death, I do think it needs to be more than 6 levels.
Yeah.
Um, I would every third that penalty increases. So you have like if -1 to everything, and then the next one is a more flavorful effect, and then -2, then a flavorful effect, then -3, and a flavorful effect,
You're saying like
and
every
so on.
other it would go? Is that
Yeah.
what I'm
Oh
getting?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that could be definitely interesting. And that seems like a relatively good pace for it as well.
Right.
I was kind of throwing out the number of 12, but I feel like that does, for the most part, get the amount that makes sense to me of just like different levels to it. Like it just once you go like, oh, let's have 20 because there's I don't know 20 sides on a die that we like to roll for this game. We all know that the best die is a D12, so stick to 12 points of exhaustion.
Right. On the flip side of all that, if it didn't end in death, like if it just capped out at one point, I would be okay with being less levels. It being the
Mhm.
6 levels
Yeah,
or
one that I've
whatever.
seen, I can't believe we didn't talk about this already. One thing that I see a ton is that instead of ending in death, it ends in you passing out. You go unconscious. You cannot stay awake anymore. You are too
Right.
tired. Like, it doesn't
That
need to
makes
be
a lot of
death.
sense, right?
It makes a lot of sense, but the problem is Hammers and Nails, they took exhaustion as this like adventuring health bar. So when you get exhausted in -40-degree weather, you don't pass out and rest
You
until
don't.
you feel better. You die.
Sure.
So the solution to that is my insane table approach where everything has a table. Here's your freezing to death table. Here's your boiling to death table. Poison swamps.
I think there's tables for there's when I say tables for that, I don't mean not those kinds of tables. There are certain D&D tables where people would appreciate that and I think would really like that concept of having a different column for each way that you're gaining exhaustion.
Yeah.
In
I know that
general, I think that's a bad idea.
I don't know. Like other systems do it. It doesn't have to be insane. No, like you said with Mothership, like they do it for wounds.
Sure.
If you take like their whole that system's whole health mechanics is different than D&D, so it doesn't completely line up. But like if you take a wound, you roll based on what happened, and here's this big table. It's like not everything's gonna fit, so you kind of pick the closest. Um, just kind of doing that, like extreme temperatures, which I think just one of those could work for hot or cold, because ultimately the body's reaction gets, even if like on a biological level it's not the same, the end conditions like
it's a pretty
um,
nuanced differentiation.
yeah,
So
extreme
just
temperatures, mental fatigue, physical fatigue, magic induced fatigue, just like I don't know.
well, just to tell you some of the, I guess, standard ways that you can gain exhaustion right now, there's forced marches, swimming, starvation, dehydration, extreme temperatures, and then raging too much.
Okay,
So, do we need
so
a
there you go.
specific table for the Frenzy Barbarian?
Well, that could be an interesting
Yes,
change.
that was
Yes,
the conclusion.
because that class is so incredibly just broken. It's just dumb.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, let's like put it in the barbarian class. Don't make it part of exhaustion. But yeah, yeah. So I don't think that would be that crazy to have come up with 6 different effects, 6 levels of exhaustion for extreme temperatures, dehydration, lack of food, forced marching,
Yeah, it
and
could
maybe
be
that's
interesting.
it.
And then
Yeah,
you can
and then
kind of
like a mental one. I still think there does need to be like a mental fatigue one versus the physical fatigue
I'm with you. I think
one.
that's a
Yeah,
very good one. And
yeah.
that one just doesn't end in death. Why would it? Why would mental fatigue ever end in death? It ends
Yeah.
in falling asleep, being real sleepy.
Right.
That definitely could be a way. So I guess that would be 7 different ways that we talked about. Forced march. I don't know if swimming just could fall under
Oh,
forced march.
yes, it's odd. The swimming's a unique one.
Well, yeah, because you can only swim for an hour before you have to start making
Okay, that would
constitution
still
saving
yeah. If
throws.
we're looking at like effects, that'll still be forced march. It's like
Yes.
yeah, for every hour past 8 for marching, or 1 for swimming.
Yeah. The only difference is it ends in drowning instead of just collapsing in exhaustion. So
Yeah, forced march, extreme temperatures, lack of food. I think you could just do lack of food or water, like combine them.
you could.
And just
They're
the lack of
different,
water
though.
makes you go up faster. That's all. Than
Okay.
lack of food.
Oh, like 2 separate
Yeah.
rolls, basically. If you're just starving, yeah, it sucks. But if you're starving and dehydrated, it really sucks. You're going to gain
Right.
2 levels of exhaustion potentially.
It's something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I like that. That doesn't feel terribly complicated.
Right.
It
and
also
then, like,
cracks
the
things
forced
open
march.
for DMs. Like you can make your own exhaustion tables, but the president kind of has to be there. If the exhaustion table is just sitting there for you to use, the DM's going to think, I can wedge that in. So this is like super
Right.
flexible in that it sets the precedent that you can just do this if you have an idea.
Right.
Right. Like here's the framework for it.
Well, that's actually a good point because I've seen a lot where people don't think about exhaustion a lot, but then you're going into a specific scenario, let's say traveling across the desert. And that's a time where you could say, this is the specific exhaustion table for traveling across the desert. Like these are the types of exhaustion you're going to gain. And from there, you could get, I'll say as complicated as you want with it, because it's not something you're trying to codify into your rules forever. It is a temporary mechanic that you're saying, this is for this scenario, how we're going to handle it. So yes, I know that there's rules for extreme heat. Maybe that's how we'll deal with you gaining a level of exhaustion, but there's also going to be other things you struggle with. Because while there are rules in D&D as raw for foraging and finding water and all of those things, they generally aren't very fun for most people.
Right.
There's some groups that like it, and more power to you. I don't really like them because I find that after 2 weeks of foraging for food, you kind of have enough that you never have to worry about it again unless the DM throws specific complications in where you lose food or you lose water. So yeah, that's like a more short-term thing instead of a total fix to exhaustion. It could just be, hey, if you're in a scenario where you want to utilize exhaustion more, make an exhaustion table for this.
Yeah. 100%.
Now I do want to take this concept though of having multiple different exhaustion tables, and I know we're not going to do it on here because that's just not even interesting, but filling those out I feel like would be kind of fun to do, and figuring
Right.
out what the conclusions of them are. I'm sure a lot of them would be death, but so far, stay with me, major ideas we've had so far. We've got reducing exhaustion using hit dice. Okay.
Yeah.
We've got extending the amount of levels of exhaustion. Does that still sound like a good idea?
Maybe not if we're breaking it out.
Yeah, that does kind of become the question, doesn't
And
it?
a lot of them don't end in death.
Yeah. So that one's a maybe.
Right.
But then, yes, breaking them out into different ones. And I think my last one that we've definitely talked about, but definitely focus on is make them less combat oriented. Because I just the way that the exhaustion levels right now are spaced out just are too much about combat every level past 1.
Right. And
I guess
it
I'm
starts
curious
out
what-
way too hard.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious what the options would be for that. Are we just talking about that linear scaling? Because there's just not a whole lot you can touch with it. Out of combat is
Linear scaling was definitely one good idea.
Okay.
Because how do you deal with things out of combat? Skill checks. That's the long and short of it. So what can you affect? Skill checks. You could probably get complicated with it and say that for 1 level of exhaustion, these specific skill checks are affected. It's probably not the direction I'd want to go. The flat
No.
modifier, I think, does work pretty well, of -1, -2, so on and so forth. And that might honestly solve most of the problems. Just having -5 to all of your rolls is, yeah, that kind of summarizes how you're feeling. But that's saying at 5 levels of exhaustion, you have the equivalent of disadvantage. Compared
Right.
to right now, at 1 level of exhaustion, you have the equivalent of -5 to all of your skill checks.
Right. Yeah, which I know I keep harping on it, but that could literally be because you stayed up 1 hour walking in the woods past when you normally go to bed.
Yeah.
It's insane.
I
Yeah, so that's
honestly
the other
still
big one.
like the
Like,
Fibonacci one. I think -16 would be really funny.
So this is the last big change though. The adjusting how you get exhaustion for like the pre-written things like forced march,
hmm
making it more like you like chunk sections of it together instead of like every single hour. You kind of do it when it makes sense. Someone needs to push an hour past, and it's just like a road leading up to town. It's like, just let it go. It's fine. If they're going to be pulling an all-nighter, going through the dense woods, it's like, yeah, you should probably have a roll a couple times. Not 8 times, and then every hour after that for the entire day until they go to sleep, but
Yeah, that I
give them a
definitely
couple
struggle
rolls.
with, because it's like, how many make sense? To me, pushing through the entire night, probably do like 2 rolls, maybe? Like 2 rolls a night, break it up into 2 chunks. That
Right.
seems kind of fair to me, saying that you could potentially gain 2 levels of exhaustion. Okay,
Right.
that's all right.
Yeah, and especially with the levels adjusted so they're not as harsh.
Right.
So,
And
like,
and
yeah, you can always every 4 hours for forced march.
sure.
Maybe, yeah, and then it
And it's
still
only if
gets
you fail,
tricky.
though.
Yeah, and then you would need to probably do 3 more rolls throughout that adventuring day.
Right. So if you pushed through, and this is something that, say, we're getting into the numbers, but
All right,
this is why we're saying don't just take these and be like, I'm using the Monsters of Multiclass Exhaustion variant. We don't have that. Like,
right,
maybe if I put something together for our game for this next one, which I kind of want to do, I'll probably end up sharing that just because. But I don't even know if I'm going to get into these specifics.
right.
Handle it how you think it makes sense,
Yeah,
because like the hours amount won't make sense rather quickly. If we're
right.
saying that, okay, it's been 16 hours, you've been awake, roll your DC 26 Constitution saving throw. Well, no. Breaking it up
Right.
into chunks, though, and adding, I don't know, 2 every single time. Yeah, that can make a little bit more sense. First one's DC 12, next one's DC 14, then DC 16. Is it
Right.
simple? No. Is it elegant? Not really. Would it be fun? Yeah. And right now, is exhaustion fun? No, it's not.
It's not. But I think that's the end of episode.
I think so.
I got nothing
Yeah.
else. I think that was a good covering of it.
Yeah. No, I think
Hopefully, people are inspired to run with it.
exactly, but not for too long, because
you might
you might
die
wear
after
yourself
a couple
out.
hours. Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah. So I think as you said, definitely hope it inspires you. I do plan on putting something together here. We'll see. Obviously, I'll run it past you two as well, because
Right.
I don't make anything in a vacuum, and I don't add anything to our games without input. But definitely expect to see some of these, and maybe for you all to hear a follow-up on how it goes, because we're going to see with a exploration themed campaign, not having exhaustion be a bit of a center just feels wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, and definitely let us know your homebrew fixes, your takes on this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm
And
sure
then
there's
send
things
us
we missed.
pictures of any dice you buy using the code MM10 on Metallic Dice Games. Any pictures would be great. We really appreciate that. So, I mean, yeah, it's like, I don't know if you knew that, but you can get 10% off your order just using the code MM10. The entire order, doesn't matter the size.
That was a weird one. I'm sorry. Why do we want pictures?
Because I like seeing dice.
Okay, that's true. Just like, oh, check out this cool dice. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What do you
yeah,
mean?
that. Yeah.
Every time you buy a dice set, you're like, hey, look at these dice I just bought.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So I want to see the dice you bought
Okay.
using the code MM10 to get 10% off your order.
Yeah, Metallic Dice Games.
Yeah. Tactics.
Yeah. Yeah.
Make sure if you enjoyed the episode, if we inspired you, leave a comment. Let us know how you plan on using Exhaustion or how you've used it in the past yourself or made variations to it. I posed the question to Twitter. Didn't seem like there was a lot of bites. I think a lot of people feel that frustration with Exhaustion, but I don't think it's a specific area that's been tackled to death, like flanking, for example. So that has been tackled to death, and I don't think we'll talk about flanking. But otherwise, subscribe, leave a review wherever you get your podcasts, like, share with your friends, give us your firstborn, all of those good things. Thank you, as usual, to our patrons who didn't have to give us their firstborn: Ed G, Muddawait, Brian H, Craig A, Isaac M, Jeff W, Luca L, Star Shinobi, Vincent M, Bob F, Joe P, Rick D, Sentinel D20, Adam A, and Rob K. Thank you all so much, and if you want to join the Patreon, generally speaking, except for like one time this entire year, episodes get released at least a day early. We've recently figured out how to even have the video a day early. So before it was just the podcast, little boost up there for you. So if you're craving that Monsters and Multiclass and you need first exclusive access, you know where to go.
And as always, thanks for watching.